Hello, good people. Welcome to Off the Deep End, a Deep Listens podcast where we explore role-playing video games in depth, I think. My name is Jeff Rud, the host and ringleader of this operation. Here joining me in this foolhardy endeavor, we have...
Hello? Hi? Who? Oh, hey, I have
you.
friends for at least another hour. Finally!
Not that you deserve it. The voice you just heard came from Chris ZombiePie REDACTED, who's otherwise famous for being on GiantBomb.com as a very dangerous moderator.
I've been told that I'm a nightmare person.
Also joining us in this endeavor, also from GiantBomb.com.
Hi, hello. I'm here because I'm trying to improve my brand. Gotta get that synergy. I was on that Dragon Age podcast, so I'm working my way up, and soon it will be me advertising dick pills and VPNs and rolling in the money.
Hard. Blue. The voice you just heard came from Braden, a.k.a. ArbitraryWater. Yeah, well, welcome. Hi. Hello, everyone.
So this is schnapps. Where's the schnapps?
I am 100% not drinking schnapps in this coffee. No, sir. Why would I do that? It's a Saturday. So, yeah, this is an idea that has been kicked around on a Discord, which we'll talk about just a little bit for a while now. For those of you who have been listening to the show for a while, you'll notice that there, every once in a while, will be an episode that, instead of focusing on, like, some hip, kind of new, kind of probably on the Switch game, we'll just yell at each other about Final Fantasy for about 3 hours or so. And during our ongoing discussions, it's come up every once in a while. It's like, wouldn't it be cool if we covered, like, Anachronox, or, like, Tales of Zestiria, or something else for bad nightmare people? And there's
Suikoden. These games have come up, and then we never do anything about them.
And we've always been told no from management, and we've had enough, damn it. That's not exactly what happened, but yeah, I think the focus of this is probably going to be role-playing, very large. That's a big bucket. There's several different schools of role-playing. I guess before we get too deep in today's subject, what sort of experience do you have with role-play stuff? Are you, let's start, I guess I'll go first, because I'm right here and I know the answer to this question. So I have been playing various role-play things since about the age of 7 or so, without realizing it at the time. I had a babysitter that left a copy of Phantasy Star 2 at my house when I was, like, really little, and it kind of blew my mind, because I'd played a lot of, like, Nintendo games up to that point. So, your Marios and that sort of thing. And here was this thing that was just, like, it just kept going and was, like, way too expansive and way too text-heavy for, like, my small, like, marmalade baby brain. But as I've gotten older, I realized, I was just, like, encountering what was at the time a really good JRPG just way too early on in my life. So that was kind of where things started, and why I guess I imprinted on that game, which I've gone back and played, and it's good for 1988. But yeah, since then, I've done a lot of tabletop stuff. I've DM'd a couple different systems in, like, Western Dungeons and Dragons-esque role-playing stuff. And I've just purchased, which is the real joy of this, by the way, just a shed load of JRPGs, just a gazillion of them. And they just sit on my shelf and mock me.
It's almost as if there's another person on this podcast who created the tradition of buying a shit ton of JRPGs for prices that will go unnamed.
Yeah. Let's single someone out here. So what was the other reason for this appearing? This may have something more to do with our...
Someone seemed to have been talking about, like, Xenosaga and goddamn fucking... What was it? What's the other game?
Shadow Hearts. Dragon Quarter.
Right.
And Lost Kingdoms. Hi, hello. I bought a lot of bullshit.
You bought a lot of bullshit for prices that, again, will go unnamed.
Because of our quote-unquote current global pandemic, last year I was like, what if I got into playing old PS2 RPGs? And then I started
streaming them.
Yes, I started streaming them. This also, dovetails in with the Wheel of Dubious RPGs, the hit streaming blog series, whereupon I put a bunch of garbage on a randomizer wheel and push the button. And
I was the one that convinced you to join Deep Listens.
Yep. You were the one who convinced me to join the Deep Listens Discord.
And then you wouldn't stop talking about your bad ideas that are normally just blogs or streams.
Yep. And then I paid question mark dollars for a copy of Xenosaga Episode 3.
Oh, no. You gotta say the entire title.
Okay.
Say the entire title.
I need to look it up.
And long story short, said, like, purchasing craziness somehow managed to rub off on Jeff.
Yeah.
And then I would always chime in, it's like, yo, there's this thing called RetroArch. Like, you don't need to go to that degree.
Okay, so I'll briefly touch on that. This show will probably be in some sense subsidized by, let's just call it crime. Victimless crime, perhaps, but crime. But I do like if there is an avenue to make a reasonably affordable legal purchase of a thing, I'm gonna look into it.
Yes.
To wit, PSN until somewhat recently.
Right. You have to give Jeff. Okay, we're gonna put a timer on the clock because we've reached the Jeff complains about the state of the PSN store.
Yeah. Okay. Start
3 minutes.
Timer. Okay, so, right, the PSN store online used to have a wish list feature. It was amazing. It'd be like, hey, if there's ever a sale on Suikoden 4, let me know, because it's $10 right now, and it's pretty good compared to the market price digitally. But, man, if it was like $5, I'd jump on that like tomorrow. And, they redid that store, which was very, let's say, Web 2.3, like, very, very text-heavy, menu-heavy, not a lot of graphics. Loved it. Their new store is terrible. It's awful. It's, just, like, image-heavy, flowy, pretty, over-designed, like, what human likes this garbage. They've gotten rid of the ability to buy PS3 stuff. And they've gotten rid of the wish list feature. Now, apparently they just added in a, like, sales tab, which is, like, giving a bottle of water to someone in hell levels of, like, useless as far as I'm concerned. There is a stealthy, semi-backdoor way to get back to the old PSN store, which I've been using still.
You have
but yeah, when they announced they were officially discontinuing that website, I went in on both my US and Japanese accounts and spent...
What's the state of the Japanese PSN store? Is it better or worse?
Same.
Oh,
I mean, so the selection in olden times, when you go through the... So it's kind of interesting. So there's like PS1 classics on there that are usually like $6. And the Japanese selection is very different. Like, Harmful Park. I don't know if it came out in the United States. It might have came out in Europe. It definitely came out in Japan. It's like a $900 game, like, not even complete, basically. You get it for $6 on Japanese PSN. So, like, of course I did that. Why? Because I'm a sick person, and I have more money than sense. But anyway, so I've spent, like, a good... let's say sub $200 when they were shit canned at that. Not much less, but I also got like 30 games off it.
1 minute.
Less than $200 for 30 games, Jeff? Wow.
That's what I'm saying, man. It's like, it's an economical way to have a bad habit. But I've also done, I spent $200 on a Mega SG, so I'm sick that way. I bought a Super SD System 3 for my PC Engine, and that was like $225 or something. I bought a mode for a Dreamcast. That was like another $200.
40 seconds.
Going rate was. So, yeah, I've made some dubious decisions.
On the hindsight, this is normally what I would feel like I would say about Xbox Live Arcade or the Xbox Marketplace, but they actually have finally figured out how to make that interface not the absolute worst shit possible, even though I'm still pissed off that whenever you get a new Windows computer, it just starts with the fucking Xbox Sales Marketplace button. Like, just all this stupid bloatware.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Let me tell you, I do enterprise Windows support for a major American university for a small department in it. There is a long-term support build of Windows that is all I use in my labs because it gets rid of all of the smart shit in Windows 10. Like, all of it. There's no store. There's no fucking Candy Crush. It is just bare-ass Windows, and I love it to death. It's perfect.
Anyways, yeah, I don't know. I guess it's even worse on the Nintendo Marketplace side of things because they're just literally deleting everything and then not letting you be able to buy anything anymore.
Yeah.
All sorts of fucked up.
So I think, so there was a weird thing where the 3DS access to DSiWare from prior to a specific day in 2011 disappeared a little while ago. My understanding is that got rectified.
Yeah, it has come back, but Nintendo...
But there was no explanation as to why.
Nintendo owes you nothing. Like, they made that fucking tribute package of the old, Super Mario 64 and Sunshine, and that's apparently going to just disappear in March of this year, and then they'll probably sell them each as piecemeal, which is, like, whole levels of just bullshit. This is all to get to the point, back to what Jeff was hinting at, is we will purchase these games through legal means when possible, but some of the games that we wish to cover, they're not available. This came up during, as Jeff would point out, this came up during our Chrono Cross series, where you can't find legal copies of Chrono Cross anymore unless you want to spend stupid wads of money to get the original disc.
It's actually not that bad. I saw a loose, not a loose one, but a complete one in the shop for like $20 the other day.
But even then, like, the fact that it's not digitally available on modern market, the fact that I can't play it on a modern console, or at least a generation removed of the current generation, is bananas.
Yeah, your way to do that is own a PS3, own a PSP, or own a PS Vita, and know a little bit about how to market or get to, like, their weird quasi-accessible store now. Either on a web page or go through the PS3, which is not a good shopping experience.
No, it's not.
I've done it a lot.
Ultima 4! Quest of the Avatar!
Yeah, so let's get into it. On this episode...
This is our first game. Why are we playing Ultima 4, Jeff?
Well,
yeah,
we're gonna talk about it. I have to introduce the game. It's important. It was originally developed by Origin Games, aka Richard Garriott, and published by Origin Games for the Apple II in or on about November 1985, and subsequently released for the Commodore 64, Atari 8-bit line of computers, the Fujitsu FM7, the NEC PC 88 and 98, IBM-compatible DOS computers, the Atari ST, the Commodore Amiga, the MSX2, the Sharp X1, the Sharp X68000, the Famicom/NES, the Sega Master System, not the Mark III, and the Fujitsu FM Towns. So,
the way we talk about how Resident Evil 4 is available on everything, Ultima 4 beat them to it, like, years ago.
Yeah, any quasi-viable PC platform anywhere in the world from about 1985 to about 1990 got this game.
And it is important to note, even though this was made by a Western developer, Richard Garriott being the kind of the creative lead here, notice how many Japanese-centric platforms had this game.
If you would like to be a part of this pre-show discussion thing that we've talked about, or send questions about these games as we get to them, You are welcome to swing by the Patreon for this show, the mothership, let's call it. It's patreon.com/deeplistens. Kicking in any amount is going to get you access to our ultra-secret Discord, where we talk about things like this show, or food, or NBA basketball, or crime, apparently. So, we hope you'll consider doing that. And without further ado, is this the only Ultima game we've played? Like, what other experience do you guys have? I'll say I've played a little bit of 7. Yeah, and I think I touched Underworld at some point.
Ooh, boy. I think Braden would probably back me up. Underworld's its own kettle of fish.
It is.
Yeah.
Very different experience.
It's a very different experience, but almost equally as important as this game, in its own handful of ways. So I played Underworld. I went through... This is going to kind of remind me of something, Jeff, that you did a while ago, is when we were talking about Final Fantasy 13-2, you mentioned Cinema Sins and kind of this YouTube account that inspired you to explore things, and you don't want to give them too much credit because they actually turned out to be shitbags.
All right.
So, in Arbitrary, I think you are aware of this person as well.
Yeah.
There was a very popular YouTube retrospective on Ultima by a man by the name of Noah Atweiler, better known as the Spoony Bard.
Okay.
And his Ultima retrospective is actually really, really well done. And I had only previously played 5, 6, and 7, and Underworld. And watching his series inspired me to check out kind of all of the games in the series, although I completely forgot that the Ultima Adventures existed. Now,
oh yeah.
Full point, Noah Atweiler is a terrible human being. He is just awful human being.
Watch that Down the Rabbit Hole episode on him.
Watch the Down the Rabbit Hole episode in terms of what caused him to rise, his meteoric rise, and then his eventual downfall. I don't want to, kick a dead horse, as they would say, but all I would say is that his series inspired me to kind of explore this franchise. And much like he said about Ultima 4, it's an amazing game that I wish I liked more, I think would be the best way to put it, but I think we're getting ahead of myself here. But I would say that I have tried to play all of them. The one that I think is like, I just can't even, I'm not going to try is Ultima 1 Aquila. Just, I can't.
Oh, you mean Ultima 0?
Ultima 0.
A Kabbaleth? World of Doom?
Yeah, it's just that we'll talk about the idea of how far are you willing to go to play games, like in the past.
What? I've missed up. It's a Kabbaleth.
Whatever.
Pardon.
All right.
All right. So,
next.
I messed around a lot with Underworld and all of those Ultima games when they came to GOG, but I never got super far into any of them, even 7, which is, I think, the one that everyone points to as the big one. But I streamed 9 for the Wheel of Dubious RPGs.
Boy, that's a dubious RPG.
That game is bad in
the best way possible.
In the best way. That game is, like, hilarious.
Well, it's like kind of a weird piss take on EA, basically.
Yeah.
I don't know. 8 is notorious because it has all of those weird platforming bits, and they're just intolerable in their own different way. Like, the way that I think about EA's management of Ultima is the same way that I look at Ubisoft's management of Might and Magic, right?
Oh, right.
It all bad. It's bad.
I mean, it's just like a large company that, like, smoughed onto, let's say, a quarter of old PC gaming properties and just sits on all of it. And occasionally, like, a coin, like, falls off the pile. And they're like, whatever. You can have that one. Like, they semi-remade Ultima 4 for mobile phones.
That's right.
Kind of. And it's horrible.
Well, remember that mobile Dungeon Keeper game that got everyone pissed off?
Oh, God.
Right.
They're all the bravest moment. So, like, we've all poked these a little bit. So, a name that has come up a couple times, and it's a name that you really can't separate from this series specifically, is Richard Garriott, a.k.a. Lord British. Richard Garriott is an interesting fella. So he was originally the son of someone who worked for NASA. He was a student at UT Austin for a little while in his youth, and a big Society for Creative Anachronisms dork, along with a certain Steve Jackson of Steve Jackson Games of GURPS fame, and more importantly, Car Wars. No one else likes Car Wars. Okay. He is a nerd. He's an archetypal, like, bookish nerd person from the late 70s. Like, everything you would imagine. Big D&D dork, big Star Wars dork, and, kind of sheltered, and something of a programming prodigy. So,
right. Steven Jackson made Munchkin.
Yes.
Right.
Also, Munchkin.
Steve Jackson is responsible for a lot of important board games.
I heard his name and it's like, wait, I need to look this up. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Keep going. Sorry.
The Origin actually around this time was working on a Car Wars game.
See, I get him and the Games Workshop Steve Jackson mixed up all the time.
That would be muddy because there's a little overlap there. So through a mix of self-publishing work and working alongside such, at the time, industry luminaries as Sierra Online, which was like maybe the first big PC game publisher in the world, like working at scale, from doing, the Roberta Williams stuff, The Princess and the Wizard, and the early King's Quest games.
Space Quest.
Richard Garriott published, a Call of Beth, and then the first 3 Ultima games, which were, released to, no small amount of acclaim at the time. Ultima 1 through 3 and a Call of Beth also, because Call of Beth is just a little more of a go into the dungeon and kill stuff game.
Yeah.
Ultima 1, 2, 3 reflect, I think, like a perfect late 70s, early 80s dork milieu. It's very chaotic, jumbled together dork energy. Like, you've got a fantasy setting, and you've got space travel, and you've got wizards, and you've got killing orcs, and, like, just this enormous possibility space, but with not a lot of, like, coherent anything to it.
Focus.
No focus. Like, the second game, I think, takes place on, like, Earth, and then the third one does not. Like, they're just games bound.
There's also,
by
like, weird themes of, like, space travel. Like, because of his influences, because of his childhood, every early Ultima game has the ability or opportunity for you to go to space or the moon.
Yeah. I think that Final Fantasy would get around, too.
The one thing about this, and I remember watching an interview that is since impossible to find, but it was him, Richard Garriott, John Carmack, and who's the Deus Ex guy?
Warren Spector.
Yeah,
Warren Spector. And they were talking about how during this era, you literally had to make your games, like actually get the empty floppy disks, copy-paste the game into the floppy disk, put it in your own packaging, and like they were literally, it was like doujinshi or doujin style, like, we're gonna get our games into every hobby shop and just like, here, sell our game, please.
Yeah, like,
and they were in like Ziploc bags.
The Ultimate one were in Ziploc bags originally.
Yeah.
Like,
Garriott literally just went to local computer stores and sold them floppy, Ziploc bags full of Akalabeth floppies.
Yeah. Or like weird, like, go back and look at like Zork packaging, which was one of the first, like, really big commercial successful computer games ever, and basically the first. And, like, the range of ways in which that game was packaged is, like, wild. And, like, the ways that game got licensed out, like, Infocom people would eventually become, like, really pissed at, like, Radio Shack, because, I mean, Zork's a game where you, like, look in a mailbox, and then there's, like, gnomes underground in caves under a house with, like, a Fabergé egg in a tree. And the box art is just, like, a knight stabbing someone to death, basically. Like, it's like it has nothing to do with Zork at all.
Yeah. Also worth noting in terms of, like, Richard Garriott, he was, like, a teenager when he started making games. It's like...
Oh, yeah. By the way. Yeah.
He jumped into this career just, like, a kid, basically.
Yeah, I want to get some ages correct here, or at least work backwards. He was born in 1961, and let's see, works. Akalabeth came out in 1979, so he was 17 or 18 years old when Akalabeth came out, 20 when Ultima 1 was released, which was like, again, landmark work. And the game we're covering today, Ultima 4, he was no more than 24 years old when it came out, which is bonkers. So what is Ultima 4? So Ultima 4 was born in some sense, and there are apparently interviews which attest to and contradict this particular viewpoint. But basically, Richard Garriott attested at various points that, he would make these games, and they would sell, and for the ones that he wasn't, getting paid directly, he would get paid, but he wouldn't get a lot of, feedback, necessarily, or, fan mail. And he alleges that apparently Sierra was, withholding fan mail from him, which is, may or may not have been true, and may or may not just be he really doesn't like the brand Sierra, because he is, if nothing else, someone who likes to throw Molotov cocktails now, with his giant pile of money.
Yeah, he has no fucks to give, and he's thrown almost every single big company he's worked with under the bus, including that ill-fated MMORPG he tried to make with NCSoft.
Tabula Rasa.
It was great. Man, ugh.
But he would eventually wind up getting some amount of feedback in the form of fan mail, and according to him, as he has it, he was a little bit surprised at the sort of things people were doing with the games. Now, I have a problem with that because, no, you didn't, but, right, it's the classic, watching people in a movie play D&D conundrum, where it's I need experience to get levels, to get more powerful, to do the cooler shit, and everything is just a means of getting, more power or experience. So I just go into town and just steal everything, and just kill everyone, because that's where all the experience comes from. Yeah, that's, a murky description of computer games, and I guess a murky description of, how people operate, given, total liberty to, muck up the world or whatever. But also, I think that maybe bothered him more, perhaps because it would affect his bottom line eventually, is, some of the satanic panic issues of the early to mid-'80s starting to rub off on that as well, where, instead of just being, computer games that are just this giant, possibility space with lots of weird possibility juice, as Em puts it, they're instead ways of corrupting the youth and teaching that the only way to succeed is to just burn every village to the ground and farm every civilian for experience points. So this bothered him to some extent. Again, maybe because he knew it would eventually cost him money, or maybe it's because it was rankling his reputation. Who knows? And apparently there are interviews that contradict how he actually felt either way. But it led him to kind of think a little bit about what he was going to do after Ultima 3. The sort of game he wanted to make. So the solution that Richard Garriott basically landed on, also should be noted this time that he moved from roughly his childhood home area in eastern Texas to the Boston area, around where Infocom was located, to work with, I think his brother lived up there. So he basically moved out of his parents' house for the first time, kind of. And experienced, adult freedoms for the first time. Had a shed load of money for someone as young as he was, bought, a really nice car, and started wearing a bunch of leather clothes and shit.
Oh, you should find some of the old school photos of Richard Garriott when he was a big figure, computer World magazine or find those old school magazines that are interviewing him, he was mwah! Like,
Yeah.
the way we think about, like, John Romero and, like, Daikatana,
Yeah.
Richard Garriott was on that high.
There's like the Itagaki picture of him in like all of his bike leathers next to his mom. Like, it's that. He's just looks like a fucking dick. He basically spent about 2 years living in his own house for the first time and invented his own moral compass.
Right.
He came up with a system of ethics.
This
This goddamn thing.
Which is the most, like, college sophomore, like, yeah, man, I've got the whole world figured out.
I invented these 8 virtues, bro.
Yes. And it's
the
like...
diagram you have to look at for this is just the most convoluted nonsense.
Yeah, and like...
Core virtues are courage, truth... What was the yellow one?
I'm pulling it up.
Love, truth, and courage.
Love, truth, and courage. You can tell. So, yes, I think that part of what you said is true. Like, we were going through the satanic panic where just saying that you played Dungeons and Dragons would get you some odd looks or, like, scoffs or, like, oh my god, I can call the cops on you.
Your local pastor would intervene.
Yeah. And so, yes, it makes sense that this game, and we'll talk about why this is kind of still kind of curious and interesting and really compelling. The one thing that I want to take up is that these 8 virtues, it is very clear that Richard Garriott is of a Judeo-Christian faith. Would we agree with that?
He attended an interdenominational church.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's definitely some... Okay. Yeah,
I've got to mention this guy. So there's a long-running blog that if you're interested in old PC games, like, at all, like real old, like Hunt the Wumpus old, like everything from like the very inception of like playing games on computers forward, Jimmy Maher, Maher, the digital antiquarian, just an amazing blogger is not strong enough for word. He's a writer, and he's self-published some of these blogs, ultimately as ebooks, and they're really worth looking at. But just extensively well-researched, and I've been referring to his Ultima 4 stuff a lot, but I mean, he's written about every one of these games, and Richard Garriott as a person, it's really good shit. But yeah, Richard Garriott was actually even more insufferable than that, because he was one of those people, frankly like me around that age, that was, actually, Jesus went to India, and he actually represented more of, like, the concept of avatarhood. Like, he was, like, a perfect ascended being. And that was, like, had this sort of muddy milieu of, like, Judeo-Christian framework for, like, Eastern spirituality and, like, aesthetic values and shit. And then you take that mixture, which, like, is pretty much just makes you the worst person in the world as a 22-year-old. And again, I was literally that person. And then you put the Wizard of Oz on top of it. Which, so he, according to Jimmy Maher, like, he did a bunch of, like, token reading of, like, Western and Eastern, like, spiritual stuff. And then started just reading, like, L. Frank Baum. And was like, aha! This is actually way more viable than some of these other books. L. Frank Baum, a guy who was like, why not just destroy all of the natives in America? They're terrible. The
Wizard of Oz is about the Dust Bowl or something.
Interesting dude.
Yep.
Maybe a little problematic now.
Sure.
Maybe.
But yeah,
it's not out of the ordinary. Like, I think that, it's worth mentioning that, like, fantasy has always had the creators of said universes and worlds, but with, like, that enjoy the smell of their own parts. Like, go back to J.R.R. Tolkien. He invented his own language and thought of that language as superior of, like, actual languages that people spoke, right? So, creating your own ethics, not super out of the norm, the part where I start to kind of like, it's like, oh, here's this weird pentagram triangle shit with 3 concentric circles, is how few of the actual in-game mechanics actually tie into these, like, pie-in-the-sky ideas and concepts. Like, there's only really 4 or 5 ways for you to get positive sacrifice, and you messed up one, so now you're fucked forever. Great.
It leads, I'll get into this later, but I think it leads into what is ultimately like a game that is basically 2 different games that you don't even really play at the same time.
No.
Because if you do, it makes it, like, just even worse than it already is in some ways. But yeah, so, as we mentioned, truth, love, and courage. And, like, each one of those, like, big ideas is comprised of some combination of 8 smaller, like, demi-virtues, I guess, which are honesty, compassion, valor, justice, sacrifice, honor, spirituality, and humility. And each one of those is some mixture of truth, love, and courage in this system. Now, I know what you're saying. This starts to sound a little bit like Yoda talking about fear leading to hate, and hate leading to anger, and anger leading to suffering, or, for a more modern version, dreams are the magic that turn something into something from Tales of Symphonia. Like, you could just swap around most of these words and wind up at, like, the same place. But this Maher article that I'm reading, like, people, like, this didn't necessarily, like, start a religion, but there was a non-zero number of dorks at the time, like, the majority of whom were, like, pirating this game, in one way or another, who, like, literally went out and just bought this game and spent time, like, trying to think about these ethics and virtues, like, in their own lives. Like, that's crazy. Like, a game actually informing how people conduct themselves on a day-to-day basis, like, sounds preposterous. And it's not even like these are bad, like, concepts necessarily. Like, the concept of humility. That's not, like, bad. But that's like a reasonable thing to aspire to, I suppose. But it's just a very specific, heady mix of shit that is also in a game where you, like, run around, like,
killing goblins and ogres and orcs.
It's a game from 1985 that is trying to tackle Richard Garriott's homegrown series of ethics that he, as, dude in his early 20s, is trying to basically figure out, like, how can I try to make a game about being virtuous, because RPGs up to that point, very murder hobo, the Gygaxian era of Dungeons and Dragons is very much about maximizing utility and moral ambiguity, and that all goes back to, like, 1970s fantasy,
white box D&D
sure.
sort of shit.
That kind of leads to what I actually like about Ultima 4, which is, to this day, it is one of the few games that I've ever played where your quest isn't guided by the need to stop this giant malevolent evil, or, like, this clearly or maybe obfuscated antagonist figure. You're just going about trying to model these virtues to the community, trying to learn these virtues. You're just trying to be a virtuous human being. And the fact that this game doesn't have, a villain is really novel. Although in future Ultima, like Lord Blackmore, they completely get rid of that.
But like, it's to the point where Richard Garriott in later interviews was like, I don't even really remember what, like, the last thing you do in that game was. Like, they had to be like, it's the Codex of Ultimate Wisdom that's in the bottom. He's like, oh, yeah. Like, because he had to put something there to do. like some final goal or whatever that wasn't just like become a Sohei, and maybe that's a problem, because it leads, as I mentioned, to kind of it feeling like there's two games in here.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no primary antagonistic force in this game, despite the fact that there are also dungeons and monsters and shit that you need to deal with. It was a really bold step at the time, and it is probably the strongest thing about this game. And, like, it's not as if there aren't games now that don't have ethics systems. I feel like, you know, let's just take out the whipping boy, right? So, like, in a BioWare game, like, you're presented with, and we just talked about it in Dragon Age, but, like, Mass Effect, it's like, hey, you want to burn down this cathedral, you want to build a cathedral, you want to kill the kid, you want to save the kid, who knows, like, and, like, it's all very regimented, very black and white, and then not only that, but it then just gives you, like, here's a meter of your good juice and a meter of your bad juice. Like, try to make the blue one bigger than the red one. If you want to make the blue one bigger, pick the blue choice. Go the left side. This game doesn't do that, really. If you want to see how you're progressing on any of these ethics, you need to go to a very specific place, poison tiles on the fucking floor, and talk to a very specific dude who will give you a pretty loose description of how you're doing on one of these 8 virtues, but isn't just like, yeah, you're like 80% of the way there. You should do 2 more things that are like this, and then you'll probably
yeah,
have this
and even then, let's just take it back for a minute. The way that you pick your class in this game, on paper, it's super interesting, right? Like, I'm gonna try and get like this
staple.
Yeah, it's a series staple, but in this game especially, I feel like the impact of your decisions or your answers to that quiz with the fortune teller, like the downstream effects or what any of your choices lead to is the worst communicated other than maybe the earlier games. Like in 7, I feel like it does a very good job of communicating what each of these virtues means. Yeah. Here, you're literally just like, I guess I kind of agree with the person who's has humility. I'm gonna click that, I guess. Now I'm a tinker? Cool. What?
They're Heinz dilemmas, basically, but they don't really, explore. So the Heinz dilemma, my spouse is in a counseling program. So it's, basically you ask someone, like, you've got a sick spouse and they're dying and the only way to help them is to go steal medicine.
There's a fortune teller who gives you a variety of trolley dilemmas. And you need to pick where you stand with each of these trolley dilemmas.
It's like, thou hast found thy friend in a most perilous situation. Dost thou give honor and help thy friend, or dost thou sacrifice thyself for 3 people get run over by the trolley?
Yeah. So, like, the thing about those dilemmas is, like, or, like, the Heinz dilemma specifically, is it's less about, like, the what choice you make and more about the why. Like, the choice that you make, like, ultimately doesn't matter. They just want you to walk through, like, why you're making the decisions you're doing. And it doesn't really have the space to do that, because it's a text parser game from almost 40 years ago. Like, of course it doesn't. But it kind of creates, like, some weird ambiguity, and then ultimately just is like, congrats, you're a bard, you're going to start in this town. It's cool, but I don't know if it's good.
No, that's kind of what I was trying to say. This kind of leads to something that I think, Braden, you and I have been talking about, is, like, the great schism of CRPGs, right?
Yeah.
When CRPGs either went down the mechanics-based path, like BioWare, like, we are going to double down on mechanics, we're going to give you these guided stories, we're going to give you these ensemble casts, we pick the characters, you play around with the mechanics. But we'll give you a tabula rasa character, but everything else is set in stone. And then you have the more free-formed, role-playing based CRPGs, where literally everything is up to you, and it's kind of like this open world. Like that big schism of CRPGs where it's like, we're going to either be mechanics-based, or we are going to be more role-playing based. And this game kind of tries to strike it down the middle in an odd way, and I don't know if I like it or hate it, because I don't know what I'm opting into. Like, when the game declares that I'm a bard, what am I opting into? Like, I don't know. later I found out that as a bard, I got to use a slingshot, which was cool because using ranged weapons in this game is vastly superior to using close combat weapons. But I didn't really know what that actually meant in game.
I think it's explained in the manual.
Sure.
Yeah, worth noting, every single version of this game, every single version of this game that I've touched, which includes the DOS, C64, Apple II, and Sega Master System versions, starts with an intro, which is that can be a kind of cutscene.
I think it's like, for the era in which this game existed, the intro to this game is actually really well done.
Very evocative, very cool, and it also tells you to read a book. Yeah. And then after it tells you to read a book, literally the next screen says, no, really, you need to read this book. Because this was from a period of PC games specifically where feelies were all the rage. So sometimes those what's a feeling, I guess, first of all?
Cloth maps,
big old books of just ponderous text. If you had an info
came with an Ankh.
Yeah. This one came with an Ankh, and it came with 2 books, which are not novel length, but they're pamphlet length.
And good on the GOG version of this game, which you can play for free. I cannot emphasize enough. You can play Ultima 4 for free if you get a GOG account. It all comes like digital PDF versions of those things.
Yeah, I will say, it might be the worst version of the game, but it is free.
It is free.
Yeah, hard to argue with free. But yeah, you absolutely need to read that first book to play this game at all. You're
just knowing what each of the cities or towns have, like which stores are where, like you're not gonna know, like for example, when we get into the Regent system, like knowing where to buy the, like, raw materials to make magic, like there's like only 2 or 3 towns and you know that by reading the book.
Yeah.
And then knowing how to mix those ingredients to create spells, which, Jesus Christ, we gotta talk about that. That was a spell book that was also in the book. This kind of gets to the issue of, like, how far am I willing to go back to play games, or how far am I willing to go back in terms of the past? This got pretty close for me.
The crushing reality of playing Ultima 4 in the 21st century. If you are not... let's not qualify this one at all. Don't play this game without some sort of assistance. And I'm not saying just read the manual and you're fine. No, don't just do that.
Have a guide.
You fool.
Just
open up a guide.
Yeah.
Yeah, just literally verbatim follow a walkthrough. This is... okay.
The world is huge. Like, that's the first thing.
I'm a babby. I feel like, okay, between the 3 of us, I definitely played the least. I played for like 2 hours. Because despite being the person who, for years, was the guy yelling about old CRPGs and being like, no, listen, Baldur's Gate, it's totally playable, man. Like, this is so far beyond my comfort zone. To use a metaphor that came up earlier, it's a little like reading Old English or Middle English.
Yeah.
And being like, I understand some of these words. The Canterbury Tales, I understand it. I understand these words, but I don't always understand how they fit together, and it gives me a headache when I try to comprehend it. This is me with Ultima 4, and it's like, yes, I understand the part where you hit orcs with slings, but the part where it's like I have to manually mix every single spell
And you
every
can't do
single
them
time.
in batches. You have to do them one at a time.
But there you're wrong. For you see, I, unlike you two, got
played
really
the NES
curious.
version.
No, I did not play the NES version. I played, of all things, the Sega Master System version.
Oh, shit.
Because I was very, very, very curious how that was going to look. I've poked the NES version at some point, and it's like the tile set. It looks like more like a JRPG. They kludged Ultima 4 into a JRPG shape, and it's the Sega Master System version was developed internally by Sega, and it is functionally just the C64 version of the game, but better. It has like some reasonably nice looking tiles. They're still tiles. The broad UI is the same, but it does two things that I really, really appreciate. One, the text parser itself is gone, and all of the dialogue basically works like Morrowind.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Really?
That sounds way better.
Yeah,
Oh,
so people will
man.
just talk, and it will just give you a set of keywords from that conversation that you can select. It fucking rules. And it lets you just mix reagents in batches. So just say, hey, you want to make cures? How many? Yeah, it's... I cannot believe it. But if you don't want to play a PC version of this game, which, maybe you do, the Sega Master System version of this is actually really good. Not only that, it was only released in the European territories. Sometimes they would do this. The Sega Master System had a FM synth add-on that came out only in Japan. But for whatever reason, a bunch of games that never came out in Japan, which is like everything after about 1989, would still have FM synth support, including this game. So there's like a PSG soundtrack, and then there's an FM synth version of the soundtrack. And they're both okay. It's a shockingly good version of this game. It plays on a controller with a D-pad and 2 buttons.
Answer this. When I started getting more than 2 or 3 companions, I felt like the combat was awful. Is it still kind of like a turn-based...
It's the same combat, basically.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Because I was okay with the combat of this game until I had, like, 3 characters, and it's like, man, navigating people on a battlefield that's kind of turn-based, but I still have to go through all of these prompts, fucking sucks. And the way that, like, the moment you start recruiting companions, the game increases the number of enemies in every encounter was just the worst.
Yeah, so here's the crazy thing. This is a party-based game where, this is why I keep going back to the 2 games thing. Basically, the most expedient way to play this game is to not get a party until you finish doing all of the ethical shit that you can. Because
I did not know.
No, and why would you? It makes no sense, right? Like, to our modern day sensibilities, that is offensive. But it's true, because all of the considerations you have, like, multiply exponentially. Like, when you have more people in your party, combat takes longer, enemies get stronger slightly, and then as you level up, they get even more strong. They're eating more food, because, by the way, this is a game where you need to be eating, like, every turn.
There's
So
a
you have,
weird
like, just a
ration
stock
system,
rations.
and it just reminded me of how I don't give a shit about rations, even in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition.
I like it, but only if my players like it, and if not, I just ignore all ration systems in these kinds of games. But this one at least starts you with food, which the other games in this series did not. So it was like the first thing you had to go was provision yourself, or you would just die. But yeah, so you need to be, once you've got 3 people, you got 3 mouths to feed, so you need more gold, so you need to fight more, which this game gives you a lot of opportunities to do, as you go from place to place trying to do anything at all. Now, I know what you're saying, you listeners at home. What about the moon gates? My answer to that is fuck you. Because there's a fast travel system in this game.
What?
Kind of. Sort of. And it's horrible.
Oh yeah, I thought you were saying that there was a fast travel system in the Sega Master System that was not included.
No. There's the same Moongate system that's in the PC game. Can either of you tell me about Moongates?
So, for whatever reason, in the world of Ultima 4, some sort of magical thing has happened to cause these gates to exist. And what's worse, Jeff, is that depending on your starting position, You might start in an island surrounded by water with no ability to get a boat, which would then require you to find the moon gate. But the moon gates only spawn every, like, so-and-so minutes, so you'll just be kind of, like, exploring this island, waiting for the moon gate to spawn. And you just need to sit, have your character eat your rations, and just sit and wait for the moon gate to pop up, and then get teleported to, like, a fucking another part of the continent that hopefully is the main continent and not this fucked up island that you're on.
Yeah.
It's awful.
People had more patience back then, I think.
Yeah, really worth noting, if you did not have the way this game was played for a significant amount of, like, the history of video game shit, was, like, you weren't necessarily, like, going to beat this game. It was a world you got to go run around in and try stuff. And there was infinitely more patience for that shit, I guess, than there is now. Because we are now all burdened by, contemporary capitalism, where all our time needs to be productive. And in the mid-'80s, that definitely wasn't the case. Haha. But no, really, you need to piece together, like, how these moon gates work, which is based on the phases of the two moons that are indicated up in, like, the upper left of the HUD. And, yeah, like, each gate, they're... You guys familiar with, like, the bus stop trolley metaphor stuff, like the frame rules for, like, Mario speedrunning? Like, every so many frames, a gate opens, and it'll take you somewhere, and if you're not at a place at a time when a moon gate opens, you need to just run around for, like, 100 turns or whatever, so it opens again, and then you've got, like, a 1 in 3 chance to go to one of the places that it will potentially take you based on the phase of Moon 2.
There are parts of this game that are just like, it frustrated me to no end. Like, there's the part of the game where in order to explore the other continents, unless you want to fuck about with these moon gates, you have to get a boat.
Yeah.
And it took me forever. So you have to be, like, level 5, and then you need to be on a coastline, and you just wait for some pirates to attack you, then you kill the pirates, then steal their boat, and then that's your boat. But your boat can sink, which would give you, like, an instant game over. Fun fact, you can't really die in this game. When you die, Lord British just summons you back.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Very Dragon Quest-ish, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. But I also forgot that you have to actually go to Lord British to level your character up, which is super inconvenient, because I could be all the way on the other side of the continent. It's like, I went up a level. Now I gotta hoof it all the way back to Lord British's to actually get my level and get my extra health points.
But surely you would just wait for a convenient moon gate.
What if it's not the right moon gate and it takes me to the fucked up island where there's the magical place where it's full of demons?
Well, you should take out your 300-page spiral notebook where you wrote down where each one of the gates is.
Yes. It's 1980, 85 or 86. You're 14. This is the one game you have for the next 3 months.
I was that kid who my parents would only let me buy one game a month for much of my childhood because we didn't have a lot of money. And for that value proposition, yes, this is a great game. This is a game that will last for years.
Worth noting, too, like, when this game was originally sold, like, the going price for PC games, like, was not a fixed thing, such as it is now. But, I mean, like, generally games were in, like, the $20 US range, and Ultima 4 was apparently priced more like $50-ish. Like, they sold this game at a premium.
Well, Jeff, I think everyone here is old enough to remember that weird period when... Remember the N64? Remember how crazy the prices were for the N64? Like, I
remember Pokemon Stadium 2 being like $90.
It was that one, and then also like Harvest Moon on the N64. I had to save a lot of money to buy that game because it was like $95.
Yeah, there's big old ROMs on those cards stuck in them cartridges. Let me tell you, those chips were not cheap, apparently.
The problem with all of that, even if you play the console version, because I played the NES version of the game, so I had a little bit of this. The world is still really big, and It's still directionless. It's still...
I think it's
I
like 256 by 256 tiles, which Ultima 3 was like 64 by 64.
Yeah.
Like, that's an enormous expansion. It's huge.
And even then, like, that whole, like, making spells and then using spells, it's like, okay, so I have to click the prompt to mix, then I have to click the spell that I want to do, then I have to click the various ingredients for that, then I create the spell, then I need to be in combat, or I open up spell and then use the spell there if it's like cure or heal. It's just so many added steps. It's just... And we haven't even talked about how, like, we spent a lot of times talking about virtues, but, like, how you actually level up your virtues feels arbitrary and in no way really connected to, like, organically exploring the world. Like, for example...
It's a separate game.
Showing honesty just means the only way to really level up your honesty is buying herbs from the lady who sells them and paying the correct sum.
Yeah, so all the shopkeepers in this game are canonically blind, and they just will be like, oh, also, worth noting, depending on where you are, the prices of regions may be different. There are towns where you can get garlic for like half the price you get it in Britannia, and so forth. So another thing you're taking note of is like, oh man, like nutmeg is really cheap in this town. I should make a note of that if I ever need more nutmeg or whatever. But yeah, you'll go into a place and she'll be like, oh, you want to buy a bunch of garlic, which is what you need to make cure, which you're going to make a lot of. So it's like, yeah, I need like 100 of those. You'll be like, sure, it's like 200 gold. How much do you want to pay? And you can just be like, 2. Or you could just accidentally, because the UI is bad, just be like, 20, that's good. And you're like, oh shit, I just paid this person like 10% the cost of all this garlic that I now have.
And now that entire attribute is basically fucked. Yeah.
So the phrase that kind of stuck from this game in net speak, in something awful speak, or proto BBS speak, I guess, was thou hast lost an eighth. Which in contemporary terms means, where's my weed? But in olden times used to be, that's a joke about cannabis.
I understand, yes.
About marijuana. See, I'm from anyway, yeah, so if you have ascended all the way to, like, the pinnacle of one of these virtues and seen Sir Hawkwind, named after a really good band, by the way, and he's like, yep, you did it. You've maxed out your humility gauge or whatever, and then fuck up. The game will just say, thou hast lost an eighth. One of the 8 virtues is now fucked, and you need to, like, do some repair work on that one. And apparently on, like, Ultima forums and shit that were, like, people asking dumb questions online, that was a somewhat common response in a period of the internet of which we are no longer in. Or if someone says that to you on the internet, it means they're, like, very old. Or they like Ultima 4 in 2021, in which case don't engage with them.
Don't make direct eye contact, and just firmly but calmly say, I do not wish to hang out with you.
Like, pull out a copy of, like, a modern RPG and use it to ward them away. Be like, look
pull
over
out a copy
here.
of The Witcher 2 and say, this is what I like. Yeah.
Look, behold, it's Undertale.
Yes. Yeah, all of these virtues are hidden stats.
Yes.
That the game does not really surface anywhere except when you talk to Hawkwind, who's like, thy virtue of humility is pretty good.
Yeah. And it's like, humility is a weird one, because like, people will just be like, hey, are you the Avatar? Like, are you like an embodiment of fucking God or whatever? And you basically have to be like, nah, then they'll be like, oh, well, that's a shame. And that's like a good way to get your humility up. Whereas you're like, yeah, man, I'm the fucking avatar. It's just like, you've got no humility. You fucked up. Well, you fucked up.
Well,
like,
I mean, that leads to like how we've talked about how this is like a system removed from the game almost. Like, for example, that one really messes you up. Another one that's really confusing is compassion, where you get into combat against orcs, and you're supposed to, when it says enemy is fleeing, you're supposed to just let them walk away, right?
Yeah.
The problem is that it deprives you of a pretty sizable reward in combat because you get more XP, you get more gold if you actually kill them, but then if you kill them, you get -5 to your compassion. And so it's interesting on paper to think that, like, oh, I gotta let these non-evil creatures run away. It's interesting. The problem is those fuckers are still casting spells at me, attacking me.
Yeah.
And it's still a dungeon crawler.
It's still a dungeon crawler where I need to level my characters up to do anything.
Yeah, it leads to you, like, so you want encounters to go, like, quickly, basically, so you can kill things without them having time to run away. So it puts a premium, I guess, on having, like, good gear, which costs money, which you don't just get, so you kind of need to kill stuff. So there's, like, this push-pull, and there's a tension there. And I guess I can appreciate that to a certain extent. But by the end of the game, it really kind of goes out the window, because if you're trying to finish this game, which, again, not everyone... It maybe wasn't even the point. Because, like, in some sense, finishing this game is like getting to avatarhood, but there's, like, an explicit end goal that's spelled out to you when you talk to Word British early on in this game, where he's like, yeah, but we need to get someone who's, like, basically perfect, and that we need to go into an very explicit dungeon and get a very explicit thing. I think it's called the Codex of Infinite Wisdom. That's in the dungeon called Abyss. And you're just gonna have to do it. So, you have to go find a book inside of TNA's Abyss, the monster.
Yeah.
And
he's gonna powerbomb you into a bed of thumbtacks.
Yeah, Black Hole Slam. He has Hulk Hogan's ring from Hall of Fame. Joseph Park was really fucking fun.
It was a really good gimmick.
Yeah.
And then they ran it into the ground.
Yeah.
Oh wait, Braden, we're making wrestling jokes.
What is this? I'm sorry.
So pro wrestling started.
Pro wrestling. So
Fall Guys, really good book.
Oh yeah, I've played Fall Guys. It's it's got the very popular game.
No, this is a book. Like, all right, this game just turns into a dungeon crawler at a certain point, and like all the ethical shit is like so divorced from it. Did you play any of the
dungeons in here? They are crazy.
Yeah,
you have to get like. Oh man, I think I showed Arbitrary. I showed you like the guide for one of the dungeons, right? And then you were looking at it. It's like, this is nonsense. The first thing is, and we've kind of been dancing around it. Like one of the early things that the game wants you to do is it wants you to meditate on the shrines and get the runes for each of the 8 virtues. Like that's the first thing that it kind of needs you to do, or asks or directs you to do.
Yeah. So
and the Byzantine process of even doing one is redonkulous, right?
And like it's a really wild range of shit they want to get those runes. Because like literally some of them are just like on the floor.
Yeah, some of them are on the floor, but then you have to talk to like 3 people to know where to look on the floor, or you can just look up the guide and just go there and pick it up, which I appreciated. But it's like, you must do a trial of fire for this one, which is literally, I gotta walk into this, like, metal shop and walk through lava while taking damage and then search in the far corner and pick it up and then get out. Which, fun. But then you have to pick up the mantra, or know the mantra, then meditate, then type the correct mantra, and then I guess you get that virtue. I guess, right? I don't know.
So what it's giving you some points for that virtue, I think, but the main thing it's doing is giving you, like, clear instruction on how you can get more of that virtue. Like, because I went I was a druid, and, trying to remember, I need to look up, you can just find the messages in this game.
Yeah, you can find the messages, you can also just you completely cut out the process of, like, talking to people by just searching in the correct spot. They're there.
Yeah.
You don't need to talk to anyone. You can just follow the guide and go to the correct spot.
So, side note, I'm playing Shenmue 2 right now. I'm a big, dirty, filthy Shenmue fan. Just want it poured just in my mouth. Just want to take off my clothes and let the Shenmue just be on my body. I love it. It's kind of like that, and it's one of my favorite things about Shenmue is, like, getting around in the world. Like, it's literally just like, hey, like, the classic, like, I'm looking for some sailors, and, like, just asking people in town, and they're like, I don't know, go talk to this person, they know about sailors, and you go, like, that's this game. Like, huge chunks of it are just going into towns, asking, like, literally going through the dialogue tree, like, so everyone has responses to, like, 3 to 5 prompts that are just like, what's your name? How's your health doing? What do you do for a living? And then they'll usually have, like, 2 things they'll bring up that are just like, oh, I know something about this virtue, or this shrine.
And again,
and sometimes it's just talk to Steve and pause about this shrine. And it's like, okay, I need to go talk to Steve on the other side of the map about this thing I'm looking for.
And I must emphasize, as someone who primarily played the PC version of this game, the parser in this is the worst.
Yeah,
it's just bad.
Very specific.
You have to be... Every character has, like, 4 things that you need to know the context clues of. And sometimes when you pick the wrong choice, that'll even drop one of the virtues, right? It's awful. It's like you need to say the word valor to the person that leads to the valor rune, but you also then need to start by saying rune, but you only get that by asking them, what is your profession? And you only know to talk to that guy if you talk to, like, a random beggar or, like, ranger. It's awful.
Some of them are hidden, by the way, which is maybe the worst part about this game.
Some of them are, like, on the outskirts of town, which piss me off to no end.
The outskirts ones are bad, but the hidden wall thing is, like, even worse.
Oh, yeah. You mean you didn't like the part where you're supposed to notice a single white pixel to notice when there's an invisible wall?
Yeah, it's
the worst part of that. The worst part of that is in pause, where the game says, "Hey, there's a herb merchant here, but you gotta find them." Here's this critical part of the game where, in order to do meat regents, you need to find the actual regent seller. And it's like, God, fuck, what?
It's really...
And then there are locked doors where you need to buy keys so as that you can jimmy the locks, but you can only do that if you go to, like, Buccaneers Bay or find the guild shop owner.
Yep. It, like, design choices that would be left out of, like, the initial, like, design doc discussions in 2021.
Yeah, I
in
know.
most cases.
And I know that it sounds like we're dunking on this game, but it's like, I want to just say, and I think you were being a little too generous, Jeff. This is one of the most important games ever made. This is a very good game within the context. I don't think people should actually play this game. Like, if you really want to have, like, an appreciation of where the genre of CRPGs is, great, fine. But like Braden said, you can play 2 hours of this, get the idea, and then walk away.
Yeah,
it's a fascinating historical curiosity, but in terms of something I am capable of playing through myself, like, my tolerance for that kind of stuff starts somewhere around the time, there is mouse control and VGA graphics.
We have to talk about the ending of this game before we go too much farther down the road of final analysis, because it's of all the things it reminded me the most of the ending of Chrono Cross, which is a weird comparison point, but it's true. So it's like the dungeons are extensive, nightmarish, labyrinthine, full of way too much combat and hidden doors and requiring locks and running out of regents and there's 8 of them.
Again, we dance around the dungeons, but man, the level design for the dungeons, goddamn! So you have to, like,
they're just classic CRPG.
You need to find the fucking gem and then find what is it? You have to find the gem and then locate the secret passageways and then find the stairs and find out where they connect to. It just, whatever. Like, this is maybe one step better than the dungeons in Final Fantasy II.
But pretty comparable.
But very comparable.
Yeah.
I'm so glad I didn't play that game with you guys.
The dungeons in Phantasy Star 2 might be worse. At the end of the last dungeon in this game,
The Stygian Abyss.
In the Abyss, when you get to the Codex of Ultimate Wisdom, it's not really a boss fight. What you're presented with is a series of questions. Series of ethical questions, wherein you basically have to enumerate that you understand the virtues, and arrange the rocks you've gotten in such a way. And, like, that's all knowledge inherent to, like, the game you've been playing. Like, if you've been taking pretty careful notes, you should be able to bang this out. And if you're using a walkthrough, you'll just figure it out anyway. But then the final question of this game is basically like, hey, when you combine all of these ethics, like, what do you get? Like, what's the answer? Like, what's all of this together? Right? So that's a pretty big, weird question. Like, what do you mean when I combine all of these things together? That's insane. There's one NPC in this game that basically gives you, like, the answer to the final question in the game. I'm gonna go ahead and pull, from the Wikipedia article in Ultima 2 here. So the dialogue of two NPCs in the Apple II release, no, that's the first one ever,
Right.
were accidentally not entered into the game, leaving them in their default test states. One of these NPCs was the most elusive in the game, and provided the player with the final answer that they would require to complete the game. With this character not responding properly, players were forced to guess the correct answer or find it from sources outside the game to complete it. This bug would later be acknowledged in Ultima 5, where the NPC appears again and admits his mistake to the player. In other words, there's no emic means of figuring out the answer to the final question of this game, unless you've really paid attention, because it turns out each one of the virtues has a rune that has a character on it, which, if you combine all those characters in Lord British's dumb, fake Lithark alphabet, spells infinity. So the final answer to this game is infinity. That is about as fucking obscure as, like, hey, there's a room that has 6 crystals that chime and let off a light, and if you don't pay attention in that one room that isn't pointed out at all, you're not going to see the good end of Chrono Cross.
But Jeff, why don't you tell the audience what you are rewarded with when you say infinity?
A brief cutscene, and then it tells you the total step count, and then it tells you that you need to keep being a good boy when you go back to
No, that's not the end. That's the ending for the consoles. In the PC version, if you say the correct answer, you get to read the Codex of Ultimate Wisdom. The game literally gives you a book. There's no cutscene. The game gives you a book to read.
Oh. And, like, hey, he acknowledged it's anticlimactic, because he kind of didn't give a shit. Like, in interviews, like, it's clear. He was more excited about, like, look up this amazing school of philosophy I made when I moved out of my parents' house. Like, it's not the point, but it's not like the game doesn't tell you, go check this thing out at some point when you get a chance. And, boy, it's really something. It's amazing.
It is a game that I respect. I don't think I ever want to play it again. And it's gonna lead to this, like, big question of how far back do we want to go with this series, because I don't think I want to go any further back than when we're gonna have to, right? We're gonna have to play some of those early Wizardry games. Like, that's something that we have been called to act. There's been a call to action. We're gonna have to go back.
Yeah, I think something
I'm not
like...
looking forward to it.
Something like, I think even the first... Here's where I ultimately fall on this. Like, old dungeon crawling shit is, like, a very specific flavor, but it's not like it's necessarily, like, a dead genre. Like, Wizardry is still something of a living franchise. Atlas keeps pumping out Etrian Odyssey games.
Hell yeah, they do.
Wizardry. And,
there's
like...
those mystery dungeon games from Square that they release on mobile phones nowadays.
Yeah, like, this is... I feel like going back to even, like, the prior 3 Ultima games would almost be a better time, because it was just a matter of like, oh, gotta go find some donjons and beat up some orcs. And there's none of this like, wait, I need to donate blood? Like, how the hell do I need to know that I can donate blood? Why would I do that? That's ridiculous. Like, spending, literally like 24 hours or so trying to figure out like what Richard Garriott thought a good person was, and trying to live that before I go like recruit people and then go try to dungeon crawl, which is like the real meat and potatoes of this genre for like its first decade and a half of existence on computers. So like I think Wizardry 1 and like a Akalabeth even would maybe hold up better than this in some ways.
I think so too, because they're very simple, like in a way that it is clearly just nerds putting AD&D into a video game form. But Ultima 4 has the misfortune of ambition.
Yeah.
It is the most important game I never want to play again.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to put it. It's the most important game I probably don't want to play. I'm glad I played it, but I think, Braden, we've kind of talked about this during your Shadowheart stream. Like, how far back do you think we need to go before we play a game that resembles an actual game? Like an actual video game? Because this ain't it. And I think we agreed that it was like Might and Magic 3, maybe?
Might and Magic 3 is surprisingly playable for a game from 1990.
But there has to be like an 80s era CRPG that we can go. We just haven't dug.
Dark Heart of Urkel was just released on GOG.
Is the answer to this just like Dungeon Master?
Dungeon Master, yeah.
Maybe when did
Dungeon
Jeff
Master
tell us all about
88?
the Black Onyx on the Sega Master System?
Not
or
a Master
Sega
System. It's an SG-1000. I can't talk much about it because I only know it by reputation. But that's a thing. Here's a novel answer to this. I think the answer might be Dragon Quest. Because, like, playing this on a Master System, like, this is probably, like, the second or third best RPG on the Master System point blank after something like Phantasy Star. And when you play this game with a text parser that is, like, strictly menu-based and some of these other features, it feels a lot just like a bog-standard JRPG in a lot of ways. Barring the weird ethical considerations that Gary baked into it. Like, Dragon Quest is this game with, like, most of its features removed, and I feel like that makes it a better game. Yeah. Like, excising a lot of the shit in this game and just getting it down to, like, trying to solve some puzzles and some dungeon crawling and not even dealing with a party most of the time, which frankly most of this game for me did not. Like, Dragon Quest 1 holds up pretty well. It's simple. It's basically get to level 26. Yeah.
I think there might, maybe there's something further back. Again, just something that we need to keep in mind.
So yeah, are we going to continue to play this game? No. It's the best game that we've played so far, which means it's the first on our list that we will definitely keep track of. So for right now, Ultima 4. Quest of the Avatar, the best RPG ever made. For now. What are we going to do after this? We're going to Japan. We're going to check out, speaking of things that are going to get delisted from the Nintendo eShop in about 2 months from today, Fire Emblem, subtitle and subtitle.
The Dragon of Darkness and the Sword of Light?
Something like that.
Basically, we're playing Fire Emblem 1.
Fire Emblem 1, the translation that was recently released by Nintendo. It's $6 on their eShop.
I'm going to make a prediction. I think that we are going to maybe play 1 or 2 battles, and then we're going to bounce on it.
So that's where I am right now. I'm probably going to keep going. Yeah.
I might keep going as well. I will probably never stream that game because I have found that streaming Fire Emblem or turn-based strategy games is not a great experience.
It's a way to make friends online.
Of backseat gamer.
Yeah, it invites the worst type of backseat gamer, and also not super compelling in terms of a streaming content thing.
Yeah.
Not a lot of role playing necessarily, but worth talking about. So that's what's coming up. Whenever this happens again, at some point.
How about you give them a hint about some of the other games that are on our to-do list?
Sure. Yeah, why not? So we have our own, thread of cool people shit, and on the docket we've got stuff like, this doesn't accord to bad purchase decisions by any one of us at all.
Absolutely.
Xenosaga Episode 1, Der Vier Zermacht, King of Dragon Pass, Tales of Zestiria, Lord of the Rings, The Third Age, Them Suikoden's, Grandia 2, Skies of Arcadia, Virtua Quest, Sakura Taisen, and the Valkyria Chronicles games of some sort or another. So, got your little Western RPG, got a little Japanese RPG.
Wondering who put some of the trashier games. That was me.
Got some Georgian Dojin RPGs. We got all sorts of stuff in here. It's all comers. We're taking them all. We're just interested in them roles.
At some point, I'm going to make you two talk with me about Arcanum of Steamworks and Magix Obscura.
Oh god, what is the state of that game in terms of how much you need to mod it just to not have crash?
There is one big definitive fan patch and one widescreen patch. And that's all you need.
Okay, great, because I remember when it was like 4 or 5 mods. God, that game...
It's the most CRPG, which is why we have to cover it.
Then why aren't we... Why didn't you put in Temple of Elemental Evil on that list?
I mean, Temple of Elemental Evil, also something worth... all of Troika's games, absolutely worth considering.
Insist that we put Planescape on that list, because fuck it. I want to play a good game.
We should make Gino play Planescape.
Yeah, we should make Gino play Planescape. He would actually probably like Planescape.
Probably.
They were scared by Disco Elysium.
The fact that 90% of that game doesn't even require you to fucking play the mechanics well, you just talk your way out of it. We're getting ahead of ourselves. Yeah. But
RPGs.
Look forward to it.
We got so much trash on this list.
It's going to be a great time. Thank you for tuning into this installment of Off the Deep End. Again, if you'd like to help keep this show and the Deep Listens mothership a-flying, please consider kicking us a few bucks on a Patreon. Again, that's patreon.com/deeplistens. Patreon.com/deeplistens. Hey, check out this Patreon at patreon.com/deeplistens. Any dollar amount is greatly appreciated, and not only that, but it'll get you access to the Deep Listens Discord, where you can send complaints and prayer concerns in real time to me and these other bozos. Chris, thank you for coming on to the show this morning.
Blood for the Blood God!
Braden, thank you for coming on to the show this morning.
Thank you for having me, Jeff.
Blood for the Blood God!
Blood for the Blood God.
Skulls for... I read some of those Horus Heresy books. Remember to don't lose your faith. That's a weed joke. Bye-bye.
Bye.